Vlogmas Day 8, and we're headed out to Avery's first middle school band concert. You excited for your concert, Avery?
Yes, I am. I'm going to be playing on, like, bells and the percussion instruments during the concert.
What do you think, Kern?
I think it's going to be pretty exciting. I hope he does amazing, and I bet he will.
Your brother has a lot of confidence in you.
I'm glad he does. I think I'll do good. My grandparents texted my mom and they said, break a leg.
Your grandparents have confidence in you too?
Yes.
Alright, so then I don't have to, because everyone else does, right?
You could still have confidence.
Oh, I can have confidence in you
if
too?
You wanted.
If I want to? It wouldn't hurt?
No.
A little bit of extra confidence?
Yeah.
You're gonna do amazing, buddy.
Yoo-hoo!
So tonight, my older son, Avery, had his first middle school band concert, which means we got to go listen to an hour middle school orchestra, choir,
Look at the snow, see how it blows, blankets and white shirts.
and band. These were almost all kids who picked up an instrument for the first time back in September, and I couldn't help thinking of the genre of comedy that's become pretty popular with comedians like Louis C.K., where the comedian gets laughs by saying the rude things about kids that everyone thinks but no one wants to say out loud because it isn't kind or polite to do so. In fact, some of the parents who I know when we met there did in fact commiserate with me in exactly that way, with that kind of gallows humor about the rough things we have to do as parents to support our children. But once our kids started playing, every single one of those parents, myself included, was nothing but cheers and praise and compliments. Avery did an excellent job on percussion, and I told him so. Jokes about how terrible kids are at drawing or about how easy kids would be to beat in a fight are funny precisely because they take the abilities of the child out of their context of the development of the child and the relative capacities of a kid to accomplish certain things, and they set it in a sort of absolute comparative context against people who are, of course, far better than them for having years and years of experience and practice at doing that thing. When it actually came to judging the abilities of a child in seriousness, none of us would use such an absolute metric devoid of context. You'd be an asshole in order to do such a thing. All of us would take into account the age of the child, the relative abilities of other children of their age, the amount of time the child had spent in practicing and learning the skill, and most of us would put a very generous portion of graciousness and positive encouragement on top of any such assessment because we recognize that positive reinforcement is going to be more successful at building a child up than any kind of negative tearing of them down. Those kinds of parents who are harsh judges of their own children and constantly critiquing them, the ones who are yelling and screaming negatively at sporting events or taking their kid aside and picking apart every little thing that they did wrong, those parents are jerks, and we all know it. When it comes to kids, we all seem to instinctually operate out of a developmental framework. That is, we all seem to judge children more on the progress that they have made rather than the absolute level of achievement they've attained. But when it comes to ourselves as adults, many of us do exactly the opposite. That is, we judge ourselves very harshly on the basis of some exterior metric of absolute achievement without any allowance for the amount of time or energy or effort we've put into a project and how much progress we've made since the last time we've attempted it. In addition, we cherry-pick the factors and circumstances and situations in which we do our comparisons. We often take someone else's finished product and compare it against our own work in progress in order to denigrate and harshly judge ourselves for not being as good as someone else at whatever we were attempting to do. We use this kind of selective judgment in very self-destructive ways. If we're the kind of person who's really very self-critical and self-doubting and low self-esteem, then we'll use it to beat ourselves up. Alternatively, if we're really a prideful, arrogant, narcissistic kind of person, then we'll pick our best moments against other people's worst moments in order to make ourselves feel a falsely inflated sense of self-worth. Instead of using these absolute and highly selective measures of judgment for ourselves of others around us, we really should be using that developmental model we use for children. The challenge is, with children, we can be relatively certain that they're near the very beginning of their arc of development on a skill set, so we can safely give them quite a bit of latitude and grace for having just begun the journey. With adults, we don't necessarily know where they should be in the arc of their development. They might only have just begun something that someone else began years before them. Or they could have begun years ago and be a long way into the process and practice of developing that skill that someone else is only just beginning. With both children and adults, the levels of progress and development are going to be a very individualized thing, but with adults, the possible range is much wider, which means in order for us to take a developmental perspective with adults, we have to know them as individuals. We have to know their story and their arc. What things are they struggling with and working on in their life? Where were they a couple years ago on this compared to where they are now, compared to where they may be in the near future? Lacking that depth of relationship and that history and duration of relationship, most of us leap to very superficial judgments about people around us. Which means if we don't know enough about a person to know how far along they are in developing a particular skill set, maybe we'd be better off extending the same generous assumptions we make about children to most of the adults around us, assuming that they're rather near the beginning of their arc in learning in many skills, and that they have a long way to go, and that they're more likely to achieve those areas of growth and progress through positive reinforcement rather than negative reinforcement. Maybe we should celebrate progress more in ourselves and in other adults, and look to achievement less. Our general suspicion is that distance and objectivity is more true than proximity and subjectivity. That when a parent watches their child play music like this, and thinks that it's beautiful, the reason they think it's beautiful is because of an endorphin-induced haze that blocks them from seeing clearly. Whereas a stranger who hears that music without the affection of a parent will be judged as being a more reliable observer. But if my personal attachment and emotional investment makes me more appreciative of this music and the progress that it represents for each of those children there, then I'm not the one who's blind. Love doesn't obscure our vision. It's the light by which we see clearly.
I'm Avery Clark and I play percussion. You're capturing the American spirit of cowboy. Trail riders move with cattle across miles of open lands to new pastures. We will give you the romping sound of cowboy cattle drive.